Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today we are discussing the Federal Farmer Observation Set number 2, Federal Farmer number 2, and this is arguably one of the most important anti-federalist papers written during the ratification debates in the build-up to acceptance of the United States Constitution. This one back in October of 1777, just a few weeks after the Constitution was signed, let alone sent out around the colonies or states to ratify for a new government. Now, what the Federal Farmer outlines in this, the second essay, we are just going to breeze through and touch on the topics because they are all very in-depth topics, and this is a very long essay. Plus, we are going to get into those in the future as the Federal Farmer gets more specific. Additionally, we have touched on a few of them while we've been reviewing in the past for Brutus and the Impartial Examiner, as well as our discussions on the Constitution at large. But let's take a quick look at some of the things that this anonymous anti-federalist is discussing. First of all, the overarching theme is the fear of consolidation. He is afraid, for a variety of reasons, again, as we're about to get into, that the federal government will consolidate. And in this one, he doesn't get in too much into why and how it's going to consolidate, but he talks about the fears of what consolidation would mean. First and foremost, he brings up distance, and now he means both physical and theoretical distance, as in distance from the government. So, first of all, his attitude is, well, this government is probably going to have a capital in one of the mid-Atlantic states, somewhere in the middle of the colonies or states, which makes a lot of sense. However, that means that the further you get from the mid-Atlantic region, the further distance you are from your government. This is going to cause physical trouble to get to the government if you have to. We are going to get a little bit to the courts, but it's going to make it harder to access superior courts and the highest level of courts for the individual citizen. And also, it's going to distance us, as I said, politically. At the time, in Farmer number 2, the Federal Farmer specifically says there are about 200 state senators for all the separate states around the future country. But if we were to accept the United States Constitution, suddenly that number with just 13 states becomes 26 people. So therefore, at the time of writing, the people had 200 representatives in various ways they could access because they were state level representatives. That number is going to be pushed further to, probably further away from you in the mid-Atlantic, and reduced to 26. He also brings up this similar idea for the House of Representatives. All of the state assemblies had numerous people in it, but you are going to consolidate those into the federal government. Now, of course, the state governments will still exist, but as the Federal Farmer and most anti-federalists promote, is that, well, those state governments are going to become less and less important as the federal government begins taxing in various ways and enforcing those taxes in various ways. He then moves on to discuss the federal court system. And we did talk about the courts just now a little bit, that people were distant. Now, the Farmer does note, and keep in mind, most of the anti-federalists were elitists in their own right, but he does note you don't want the courts too accessible from people because you don't want people just suing each other willy-nilly, all wild-like. And while we don't talk about modern politics too much on this channel, I will note, if you think people sue each other a lot now, people used to sue each other way more in the 1800s. All the time. And this was a fear. They didn't want people to get sue happy, so to speak. So, therefore, the Federal Farmer is cautious of this, but he does want people to be able to access it. And at the time, even though there were circuits being ridden by the state courts, people still had a little trouble getting there. Now, if we have one federal system, that's going to have less justices. And as many anti-federalists feared, the more power the federal judicial system got, the more obsolete the state system would be. And therefore, well, we have less judges, they're doing less rides, they're mostly focused in the mid-Atlantic. As the country grows, there are going to be people less and less attached to this. On top of this, the Federal Farmer moves to the Bill of Rights, or I should say lack thereof, because keep in mind, the Bill of Rights was ratified 3 years after the Constitution. There was no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Those are amendments to the Constitution. And therefore, you have some people like the Federal Farmer saying, why does the Constitution grant the federal government all of this power and grant the people zero power? The people are granted zero. as far as he was concerned. Now, in a country this large that looked like it was only going to get larger, this is going to cause trouble. And this leads to the main point of federal farmer number 2, is that for consolidation to actually happen, for the federal government to actually secure the powers it desires, it's going to need to use force, because one of two things will happen. Either the people and the states will be not happy that the federal government's coming in trying to make laws and regulations where the people and the states had already been accustomed to doing so. They're either going to meet resistance from the people and the states, or they're going to meet neglect, where the people in the states just don't care. And he predicts, which, we do see later in American history, seems to be pretty right, that either resistance or neglect will demand that the federal government resort to the force that it is constitutionally allotted to enforce its rules, regulations, and laws. And I have a quote here from the end of Federal Farmer number 2, which I think is very telling. In each of these scenarios, the federal farmer believes, quote, neglected laws or a military execution of them must lead to a revolution and to the destruction of freedom, end quote. And I think that's a good summary of Federal Farmer number 2. He does say it pretty much the second to last sentence, so he is summarizing with it also. But that is at large a real brief overview of this very, very long thing. I do have a link in the description. You can go read it if you want. But again, Federal Farmer is going to get into more detail on these things later, especially as to how he predicts them happening, and getting into more detail on the issues with the Constitution. So if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit like and subscribe. I put out content about the American Revolution 7 days a week. Only on Fridays do I talk about Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The rest of the week, we focus on individuals, and, well, we throw other fun stuff in there too, like trivia on Fridays. So thank you so much for coming, like and subscribe, and I'll be back to you with a founder tomorrow.